Today I am taking up the ecology part 2, responses to abiotic factors and adaptations. First, let us take up responses to abiotic factors. The most important abiotic factor is temperature. Temperature regulation is very important for all the animals, mostly for all the animals. In the long course of evolution, the temperature regulation is incorporated in their genes. So, organisms can survive effectively at a particular range of temperature. And animals try to maintain a constant internal environment. Homeostasis means maintenance of steady state of internal environment, that is, constant body temperature, osmotic concentration, and body fluids, etc. Temperature regulation is a costly process because animals lose a lot of heat, and to generate heat, more food has to be expended. That's why only few animals have an effective way of maintaining a constant body temperature. Among the animals, only the birds and mammals can maintain constant body temperature. The animals maintaining constant body temperature are known as homeotherms. Homeos means the same. Always the body temperature of homeotherms remains constant. The heat to maintain this body temperature comes from internal or it is generated internally. The heat is generated internally. So, homeotherms are also known as endotherms or warm-blooded animals. But 99% of the animal species are cold-blooded or poikilotherms or ectotherms because they cannot maintain a constant body temperature, and their body temperature varies according to their surrounding temperature or their ambient temperature. Then, in the case of temperature regulation, if you come to human beings, it is two types: external regulation and internal regulation. All animals except human beings cannot maintain or cannot regulate their external temperature. But human beings can manipulate their ambient temperature. In summer, by using air conditioners, we regulate our external temperature or our ambient temperature. In winter months, by using the heaters, we maintain our ambient temperature. But it is not possible for other organisms. Then coming to the internal regulation, it is animals are classified into three categories: regulators, conformers, and partial regulators. The regulators maintain a constant body temperature irrespective of the external temperature. So birds and mammals maintain a constant body temperature. As the enzymes are highly efficient at optimum temperatures, in birds and mammals, they work with utmost efficiency. This is the reason why birds and mammals are seen in the polar regions. If the body temperature goes beyond or below this optimum temperature, enzymatic activity decreases. If you take the example of human beings, our body temperature is 37 degrees centigrade or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Only at this temperature, our enzymes act or function with utmost efficiency. So maintenance of this temperature is very essential, and this is incorporated in our genes. Then, conformers. Conformers cannot regulate their body temperature. They have no capacity. So what happens? Whenever the external temperature goes up, their body temperature rises. Whenever the external temperature comes down, their body cools down. So these are the conformers. So as the temperature goes up, their body temperature increases. If the temperature comes down, their body temperature decreases. So their metabolic activity also changes according to the temperature. You know about Van Hoff's rule. If the temperature increases by 10 degrees, the metabolic activity doubles. So in the case of these animals, the metabolic activity increases with the increasing temperature and it decreases with the decreasing temperature. But it happens within a biokinetic range, that is from 15 degrees to 45 degrees. Beyond the biokinetic range, Van Hoff's rule does not apply. There are some animals which are known as the partial regulators, and the camel is the best example. In the case of partial regulators, what happens? For some time, they behave like conformers. Later on, they behave like regulators. If you take the example of camel, during night time, their body temperature cools down to 35 degrees centigrade, 34 degrees centigrade. In the morning, with an increasing ambient temperature, their body temperature also rises. And when it reaches the optimum temperature, which is around 41 degrees, they maintain that constant body temperature. Only when it is very hot, they start sweating. But they maintain the temperature of around 41 degrees centigrade. Camels have many adaptations to survive in deserts. They have long legs. Then their fat is stored not under the skin but in the hump so that they can radiate body heat very rapidly. And they store reserve food in the form of fat. You know that fat produces more metabolic water than carbohydrates or proteins. That's why fat is the main reserve store of camels. They also produce the driest dung. Their urine is also highly concentrated and a less amount of urine is produced. In this way, camels have many adaptations to survive in deserts. Then, there is one rule known as Bergman's rule. Here you have to understand about the body surface area and body volume. The ratio between the body surface area and body volume. If the body size is small, remember this point very carefully. If the body size is small, the surface area or the ratio between the surface area and body volume will be more. If the body size increases or bigger in size, the ratio between the body surface area and volume will be less. This has great bearing in the case of warm-blooded animals. Bergman's rule applies to only warm-blooded animals that live in the polar regions and also in tropical regions. You take the example of bear. Bears are found in the polar regions, and there they are the polar bears, and also bears in the tropical countries. The body size of polar bears is much bigger than the body size of the bears living in the tropical regions. As a result, what happens? In the case of polar bears, the ratio between the body surface area and the body volume will be less. So, they lose less heat through their body surface. And it is essential to conserve body heat in the cooler regions. Coming to the warmer regions, body heat has to be lost because body will be absorbing external heat. So, the surface area and volume ratio will be much more because of the smaller size of the bears living in the tropical regions. In this way, if the same animals or the same species of animals living in the cooler regions and warmer regions, the animals living in the cooler regions will be much bigger in size than the animals living in the warmer regions. This is called Bergman's rule. It also applies to whales, polar fox, etc. Then, stressful conditions are localized or exist for only a short time. So sometimes what happens, due to seasonal variations, the external conditions will be stressful to survive. For example, if you take the winter in the polar regions, it is very stressful. Living in those conditions is very difficult. Similarly, if you take the tropical regions, in summer, water dries up. So living in such conditions becomes difficult. So to escape these temporary stressful conditions, animals have adopted two types of protection. That is, escaping in space and escaping in time. Escape in space means avoiding the stressful place. Birds are the best example. With the oncoming winter, what they do? The birds living in the cooler regions like Siberia or northern parts of Europe migrate to warmer countries like India. So, during the winter season, we find a lot of birds migrating to our continent. Best example is found in the form of Kedalo National Park in the Rajasthan. It was formerly known as the Bharatpur Bird Sanctuary. With the approach of summer, these birds, they go back to their original places because heat is unbearable in tropical countries but comfortable in the cooler regions. So in this way, birds and some other animals migrate during unseasonable or unfavorable conditions. This is known as escape in space. Escape in time. All animals cannot travel, all animals cannot migrate. So some animals, what they do to overcome the stressful conditions, they escape into time. That means they suspend their metabolic rate by producing, and they suspend their metabolic rate by adopting various ways. So in summer, what they do, the microorganisms living in water produce thick-walled spores, or they are transformed into thick-walled spores and overcome these stressful conditions. In the case of plants, what they do, they produce seeds, and it has another advantage also. The seeds help in propagation of the species with the oncoming of favorable conditions. Then, during the suspended metabolism, very less energy is expended and the rate of respiration will also be at a lower level. Some animals, what they do is, during summer, they undertake a summer sleep, which is known as estivation. In winter, they undertake winter sleep, known as hibernation. In this way, by adopting hibernation and estivation, some animals overcome the stressful conditions. Then, in the case of insects, what happens is, they show another type of escape known as diapause. And diapause means suspended development of the embryos. So, the arrested stage is not the adult stage but the development stage. For example, take cicada. Cicada is found in USA and for many years it undergoes diapause. So these are some of the responses to abiotic factors. Then, what are the adaptations evolved by the living organisms over millions of years to avoid these stressful conditions? These adaptations are three types: physiological adaptations, morphological adaptations, and behavioral adaptations. If you take the physiological adaptations, there are a number of such adaptations. The first one is seen in the animal known as kangaroo rat, which is known as Dipodomys. This kangaroo rat lives in North America. It has great adaptations to survive under desert conditions. it eats only driest seeds. It also never drinks water. It manages its water requirements through food and through metabolic water. To conserve the body water, it has longest Henle's loops in their kidney. And this animal also produces highest concentrated urine in the animal kingdom. So by producing highly concentrated urine and by obtaining or by using efficiently the water available from the driest seeds and metabolic water, it can survive. Then, high altitude sickness. There is a place called Rohtang Pass in Himachal Pradesh, where the height of the mountains is 3,500 meters, more than 3,500 meters. Similarly, there is Mansarovar, a holy place for Indians, and it is situated in China. If we visit these places, Rohtang Pass and Mansarovar, we are exposed to high altitude sickness. That means we suffer from nausea, fatigue, and palpitation. Why? Because of rarefied atmosphere. As we reach the higher altitudes, what happens? The air pressure decreases. So also the availability of oxygen. Our RBC are unable to supply enough oxygen to meet our metabolic needs. So what happens? We suffer from high altitude sickness. People living in those areas permanently never exhibit this high altitude sickness. Why? Because they have high concentration of RBC in their blood. So when the RBC count increases, what happens? The supply of oxygen increases. That's why the local people never suffer from high altitude sickness. That's why Sherpas are famous for climbing Mount Everest. They help the mountaineers who try to attempt climbing Everest mountain. If we reach there, what happens? We suffer from the altitude sickness for some time. But after some time, our body copes up with the sickness. How? By increasing our RBC count. So by increasing the RBC count, we receive enough oxygen to meet our metabolic needs. And one more point also we have to remember here. Due to altitude sickness, what happens? More and more oxygen is unloaded in the tissues. You remember the respiratory system. We have explained how oxygen is unloaded in the tissues. We have to remember the Bohr effect. In the Bohr effect, what happens? The oxygen dissociation curve shifts towards the right. As the curve shifts to the right, more and more oxygen is released from oxyhemoglobin. So in this way, we overcome high altitude sickness after some period of time. Then, our metabolic activities occur at a narrow range of temperature. This is another adaptation. Over a long period of evolution, we have acquired the ability so that our enzymatic activity occurs at highest efficiency in a particular range of temperature. Already have told you, we maintain a constant body temperature of 37 degrees centigrade. Then, there are some animals living in hydrothermal vents in the oceans or hot water springs where the temperature is more than 100 degrees centigrade. The microorganisms, you heard about thermophilus bacterium. They live at very high temperatures. How they survive? Because they have adapted to tolerate high temperatures. Then, some animals also live in ice in the Antarctic regions or in the very cooler regions. There they have adaptations to survive in cold climate where the temperature is below zero. Then there are some animals living in the deep sea. In the deep sea, what happens? There will be total darkness and the pressure will be very high. The pressure will be more than 100 times of the atmospheric pressure. There, the deep sea fishes and other organisms developed various types of adaptations to survive. They have a large mouth, they have bigger teeth, they also produce light. Like that, they have many adaptations to overcome the stressful conditions present in the deep seas. These are various physiological adaptations. Then coming to the morphological adaptations. Desert plants, they have to conserve the water, so they have a thick cuticle covering the leaf surface. Then, in some plants, in the desert plants, the stomata are placed deep in the pits to prevent water loss. Then, desert plants also have special photosynthetic pathway called CAM, crassulacean acid metabolism. In these plants, what happens? During daytime, the stomata close down to prevent loss of water. Then you take up the plant to open shear. In the case of open shear, leaves are absent because they are modified into spines. The stem is greenish in color, flattened like a leaf, and helps in photosynthesis. Then there is one rule known as Allen's rule. It applies to animals. According to this rule, the animals living in the cooler regions have shorter legs, shorter ears, and shorter extremities. What happens if the extremities are shorter? If the legs, tail, snout, etc. are smaller or shorter, what happens is the body surface area decreases. I have told you in the case of Bergman's rule. If the ratio between the body surface area and the body volume decreases, the heat loss will be less. So to reduce the body heat loss, the warm-blooded animals living in the polar regions have shorter extremities like ears, tail, legs, etc. Then, the polar aquatic animals have another type of adaptation. The polar aquatic animals like whales, dolphins, what they do? They have a thick fatty layer underneath their skin. This fatty layer is known as blubber. Blubber is a bad conductor of heat and it prevents loss of body heat. So they could survive in freezing ice waters in the polar regions. So in this way, animals have various morphological adaptations. Then, the third type of adaptation is known as behavioral adaptation. Reptiles are famous for this adaptation. Reptiles are if you take lizards among reptiles, they are cold-blooded animals. They cannot maintain a constant body temperature. During night time, what happens? Their body temperature cools down. And when the day arrives, because of the low body temperature, they are inactive. Their metabolic rate is low. So to increase their body temperature, what they do? They bask in the sunlight. So early in the morning, they expose their bodies to the sunlight, and as the body and their bodies heated up, the metabolic rate increases and they become active and go in search of food. So in this way, they increase their body temperature. But by midday, what happens? The ambient temperature will be very high. And accordingly, the body temperature of the lizards also increases. Then what they do? The metabolic rate comes down because of high body temperature. Then they escape into burrows or they hide under the shade of trees. In this way, they avoid stressful heat conditions. These are some of the behavioral adaptations. So in this way, animals respond to abiotic factors through various adaptations. Thank you.